Good morning, everyone. Believe it or not, it is 2022, and I'm so happy that we can be together again in coming into the new year. I know I haven't been around. I had to take a little break, had to find some good guests as we move into 2022 in the collective. So I want to welcome the Reverend Dr. Frederick Jerry Streets. He is the pastor, senior pastor of the United Congregational Church on Dixwell Avenue in New Haven, Connecticut. And that is the oldest Black congregational church in the United States. And he is a licensed clinical social worker. And he is on the faculty of Yale Divinity School, if that's not enough for you. So we welcome Reverend Streets as we have a conversation about holding on to faith as we move through this pandemic and this year. So Dr. Streets, I welcome you. Thank you so much for giving up your time.
Well, Shelley, thank you, and thank you to your audience for this time and this very important conversation.
So Dr. Streets, with all that we as a nation and as an African American community have gone through just in these past 2 years alone, never mind prior to the pandemic, how do we hold on to faith?
Well, I think it's a good question, and it's one that all of us, particularly whether you consider yourself religious or spiritual, are grappling with, particularly, as you said, over the last couple of years. I certainly have been pondering it, and members of my congregation and other people outside of churches do the same. I would encourage your audience to give some thought to what are our expectations or assumptions about what it means to have faith. Because we bring to any given situation a certain set of frameworks or assumptions or expectations. And as challenging as these times are, it's also an opportunity to re-examine, okay, what do I understand faith to be? What do I expect as a result of being faithful? And whether or not those expectations, those frameworks need to be reconsidered. Now, being challenged in this way does not mean that you are having a crisis of faith, though one can have a crisis of faith. But to question and to doubt, to wonder, is a part of the faith journey. I often say to people who feel that they're really struggling, Reverend, I'm struggling to have faith. I said, do you realize that struggle is an act of faith itself? The actual struggle to have faith is an act of faith. And so having encouraged people to look at that, then I asked them, okay, let's look at some of your expectations, how you might want to change the way you think about faith and what it means to live a meaningful and faithful life. So the question then becomes, how do I live a meaningful, faithful life under the circumstances that I find now to be so stressful? Because faith is ultimately about living a life with a sense of purpose and meaning that one can derive partially from who one believes in or the deity that one believes in and the ways that you might worship that particular understanding. So so that becomes the question: how can I live a meaningful life even though there's so many things around me that's making me feel that life is very, very vulnerable, and it may even feel to some people that what's the meaning of life if everything is, quote, dying around me?
Yeah, because I think for a lot of people too, at this stage of the game, they may question their faith, but they also question their religion.
Right.
Because they may not feel they're getting something from it, or they don't know what they're looking for.
Yeah, and I think you made a very important distinction there. Just like a person can be religious and not necessarily spiritual, a person can be spiritual and not necessarily religious.
Right.
And And now, what's the distinction? Well, I mean, when we think about religion, we think more about doctrines, creeds, rituals, going to a
Dogma.
church,
Yeah.
a mosque, a synagogue. It's a structured way of, within that framework of that religious community, to be a member of a congregation. Um, but spirituality is far broader. It is the way in which people feel a sense of connectedness to a larger created order, that their life has purpose and meaning, that they're connected to something much broader and bigger than themselves. And one can have a spiritual experience inside of a structured religious framework or outside of it, you see. So whenever there's this discomfort, be it around religion or spirituality or just questioning, as you said, faith, I encourage people to really understand that feeling the discomfort and questioning under the circumstance that we're all living is, first of all, normal. it's it's normal. You'd be surprised how sometimes, and maybe I was raised this way too, that if you feel discomfort, that means you're not faithful.
Right.
And
Right.
so then you feel judged. Oh, I shouldn't feel this way about
Right.
my church, my God, my religion. Something must be wrong with me. No, no, just the opposite. It is very, very normal under the circumstance to have these kinds of discomforts. And as I said earlier, the struggle for faith can be understood itself as a statement of faith. And so we have to sometimes think about the difference between our questioning and having a crisis. And questioning can be a part of our search and
Mm,
ultimate
right.
growth
And it's
through
interesting you
this
say that
process.
because somebody just asked in the chat, how can a person expand their faith through study or good works? Or is it a combination?
Well, I'm glad that person asked that, because I want to suggest to our listeners that uh, we we might think of us. Some people might find this language a little challenging, but see ourselves as a partner with God as we understand God, and as a partner with God, we are to develop and practice a plan of self-care in
Mm,
all three dimensions of our life. So being faithful is really an act of self-care. And so self-care has to be in three dimensions:
hmm
mind, body, and spirit. And so when you're a partner with your creator, when you're a partner with God, you come up with a plan to take care of your body, what that means to you. Most of us, that means basically three things: getting enough rest, eating the
hmm
right foods, and exercising. And it may include some form of meditation, which is can be prayer or much broader than prayer.
And let me ask you a question about that.
Yeah.
Because it seems maybe in the past 5 to 7 years, I've heard more people of color, specifically African Americans, talk about meditation.
Yes.
There
That
was a time where that was not considered part of, well, at least I know,
right.
as a Baptist,
Right.
nobody ever talked about meditation. And certainly they might have mentioned that Jesus meditated,
Right.
but as far as I remember, the congregation was not uh, asked to meditate or even, say, okay, this is something that should be part of.
Right. In fact, the idea of meditation, even though there is a long tradition in Black religion across denominations of meditation, you're absolutely right. Most of us were raised to think about prayer, and if you meditate, you're in some kind of esoteric,
Right.
twilight zone, kind of maybe something that's even an insult to God.
Yeah.
But think about it this way: prayer is when we speak to God in however way we do it, writing out loud in the privacy of our home. Meditation is when we listen to God speaking to us.
Okay.
It's a form of quieting your nervous system. It's a form of centering and focusing. It's a form of being present in the here and now, and reducing anxiety. And so one can have a prayer life specifically structured around their speaking to God as they understand their God to be, and meditation, which can take the form of 5 minutes of quiet time in the beginning of the day, end of the day, taking walks, in the park somewhere, sitting by a stream, or one of the streams in New Haven. It's a
Mm,
cold day, but just sitting on a park bench for 5 minutes, or just quietly being quiet, uh, and listening to your own heart, so to speak. So this partnership with God that nurtures our faith in the broader sense of faith in God,
mm-hmm,
it's also faith in ourselves. It's faith in our fellow human beings, and it's about having faith in life and hope about the future. And so that partnership has to be three-dimensional. You have to take care of your body the best way you can.
mm-hmm,
You have to take care of your mind. And that means avoiding things that overstimulate us and fills us with negativity that affects our mood, and affects our own spirit. And
mm-hmm,
then you have to take care of your spirit. That can be through prayer, through study of some sacred text, engaging in activities, with small groups. It could be also time alone, but taking the initiative to reach out to others when it's appropriate and be with others, like Zoom and other formats. But it also means taking time to give back to people, to serve
mm-hmm.
in some way, a soup kitchen, or whatever way you can give back to people. So when you have a plan that centers around the mind, body, and the spirit, it will nurture your sense of faith, and it will help you to deal with anxiety. Because fundamental to anxiety is this feeling of not being able to control the outcome of something. So part of being faithful is learning what to let go of, learning what it is you really have control over in your life, and
So,
that which you do not have control, you let it go. You see?
so in this pandemic,
Yes.
we know that there's very little control that we have
Mm-hmm.
outside of putting on a mask, right? Getting vaccinated, being
Mm-hmm.
boosted. Um, so how do we let go, or how would you think we would let go of that anxiety?
Well, you would have to trust. I trust in the science as well
Mm,
as my faith in God. Uh, it's unfortunate that we live in a time when some people have caused us to see a division between science and faith,
mm-hmm,
or even science and democracy. Um, and uh, God, we say, growing up, God moves in mysterious ways. Well, God can move through the creativity, the ability of scientists, doctors, and others who understand the human body and come up with insights and vaccines the way we have. Think about it. A year or so ago, we were praying for a vaccine.
right.
We couldn't, wait. And then when the vaccine comes along, some say, well, that's too quick. Or I gotta
Yeah,
wait.
right,
I,
right.
I, I understand those pauses. I'm not criticizing anybody for the pause, but at some point, you have to be willing to trust and take initiative. Though we may feel vulnerable and less able to control what's going on, there's far more we can do than we give ourselves credit for. And that means doing those things in those three dimensions, the mind, body, and spirit, to the best that we can. And 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 cherishing, valuing, celebrating that we can do the things that we can do, rather than seeing what we do in those three areas as not enough.
Mm-hmm,
you know
mm-hmm.
it's like someone saying, and you take the body component. Um, oh, I need to take, so all right, I'll start walking 10 minutes a day, and they start walking 10 minutes a day, and then they start downing themselves because they can't run a marathon. Something. Okay, come on, back up a little bit. You were doing
Right,
nothing, and now you're walking 10 minutes a day, which is great.
right.
Don't elevate it. to say that's not enough because you can't run a marathon. So it's re-examining those expectations and being compassionate to yourself as well as to other people. You see, that's the partnership with the deity, with God, that I think is a part of how we grow stronger and build up our resilience.
Somebody comments, all of the Black churches I've gone to scare me. Didn't find it comforting and encouraging to improve our humanity, but threatening damnation for not believing enough.
Right.
And I think there's a point where I know I certainly experienced that in church, and it doesn't necessarily help your faith walk.
Right.
I know it didn't help mine.
Right.
I'm eggshelling it, right? Because I know that anything that I'm doing could cause me to, quote, go to hell,
Right.
end quote. So how do you encourage people who've had that experience to find their faith?
Well, first of all, don't give up. Um, I understand that binary kind of worldview that people can run into in certain churches and preachers. Uh, the world is either you're a saint or you're a sinner. You know,
Mm,
the world is either good or bad, and damnation is all around us. And I have compassion and respect for those people who are so convicted, but I see that kind of expression as the preacher's own struggle or attempt with control,
mm,
with trying to control his or her environment by putting it in these binary ways. And and sometimes, in my opinion, it's a misinterpretation of scripture. Uh, but we can be here for weeks talking about the nuances and the differences in theology and all that. But I
right,
think crucial to your point is that one has to continue to search, because self-care means you don't stop at one thing, right? When you go shopping for that new item, that dress or suit, you might try on several suits,
right, right.
so or several dresses. So you don't give up, and you look for a faith community that approaches what I would say the living of faith in a more humble way. That is a way of saying we're not sure. Uh, uh, we can't say absolutely about certain things, but these are the things that we've come to understand that has nurtured us along our faith walk. Secondly, keep in mind that the meaning of being a person of faith is both, here's a paradox, is
Mm,
both independent of what we experience, but also it comes through our experiences. So you see, that's the paradox. That
so what do you
that
mean by that?
well, if if I'm only faithful when things are going well, if I'm
Mm-hmm,
only faithful or trust or believe in God because I'm healthy, happy, got a little money in the bank, my hoopty is running okay, whatever it
mm-hmm,
might be. And
mm-hmm.
then when any of those things go away, you lose faith. Then faith is dependent upon your estimation of the status of those things in your life.
Okay.
And so when the status of those things change, then your idea of faith can change. That makes it dependent. So while our faith can influence the way we think about our condition, our faith is also independent of the condition. That's the paradox.
That's the paradox.
You say, if I come at faith as an if then proposition, if
Okay.
everything is all right with me, then I will believe in God. You see the danger there. It's not it's beyond what may be your condition. I know that sounds very stoic, maybe to some people. It's like Job saying, no matter what happens to me, I'm still going to
Right.
trust in
I'm
God.
still going to believe.
I'm
Yeah.
still going to believe. But that's a part of the challenge of faith, to see it through your experience, but know it's something even greater than your experience.
And the person says, thank you. That was very helpful.
Oh, I'm grateful for that. Well, there's so much about the religious life or being a religious or spiritual person that so often gets interpreted as ways of which by which we judge ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and we judge other people. And the essence, I think, part of the essence of spiritual growth is
Oh, Dr. Streets, where'd you go? I think you hit a button. There you are.
we.
You hit a button.
Oh, I see. We need to have more a more compassionate approach to religion, spirituality, to ourselves, and to other people, particularly people we disagree with. When we go to those churches and the minister or someone is in that binary or promoting a certain
Mm-hmm.
orientation that makes us feel uncomfortable, you have to say, okay, that's their position. Uh, what does my discomfort by what they're saying is what is it saying to me? What is the gift that my discomfort is offering me?
And that's a good way to look at it, because I think so many times spirituality, religion are very personal things, right?
Right,
Because they're connected to our values.
right,
So when you start to talk about somebody actually challenging what you believe, some people will take the high road, or some people will actually try to argue it out.
right,
And I think, as you said, finding the discomfort in yourself will lead you to a different way of thinking about it.
right. And the arguing it out it should be a benevolent approach. It's thinking, it's examining, it's having a conversation. For some people who are promoting a certain view, even somebody would say, "Well, I'm saying I'm promoting a
Mm-hmm.
certain orientation."
Right.
That doesn't mean that you go to your church and have to argue with the reverend or the bishop every who wants to go to church ready to argue, uh, uh,
Right. Right.
so you're right. People say, I don't, why would I go someplace that I'm feeling uncomfortable?
Yeah.
What I'm suggesting is that you examine the discomfort for the gift that it might be, not that you need to stay in the environment that makes you uncomfortable.
Well,
But
that goes back to, and I'm sidebarring a little bit here, the whole doubting Thomas
right,
piece, where, Thomas says this, the other apostles tell him, we saw Jesus, and, we know he was crucified.
right,
And he says, I need to see it.
right.
And so once he sees it, then he is a full believer.
Well, it's interesting you should bring up that as an illustration because the dichotomy, the black and white, the good or bad that
Uh-huh.
that some of us get caught in that story. What one way to think about it is Thomas is asking the church for the church to show its woundedness.
Mm.
And how do you then, by faith, address the wounds? Rather than the church is unwounded now, we've got this triumphant resurrection notion, and the church is now perfect because of the resurrection. But
Yes.
people sitting there know that they're not perfect. They know that human beings are not perfect, and the institutional church is not perfect. And so, when people get so caught up in trying to avoid the wounds of the church, it avoids its healing.
Mm.
And so, if people go to church feeling broken, they don't want to be broken up more.
Right. But what's the point?
Well, that's right. They want to have a framework for thinking about their brokenness, and you
Right.
can't. It's hard to do that if you're in a church that lacks empathy because it assumes its wholeness in a non-graceful way, if you will. That is, it assumes its own salvation in such a way that it makes the church come across as us and them.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And my understanding of part of the understanding of the mission of Christ is that God in Christ came to the world, not just to Baptists, Methodists, and Pentecostals.
Right. He came into the world. And I want to talk about that a teeny weeny bit. It's gonna
Yeah,
move. But let's take this break. You are joined to the collective right here on WSME Enlightenment Radio, watching on Facebook Live. Hey to the UK, hey to Canada. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back with Reverend Dr. Jerry Streets after this. Don't. And just that quick, we're back.
Yeah.
This is the collective on WSME Enlightenment Radio. And today's discussion is a conversation about faith. And I am fortunate enough to have in the studio with me the Reverend Dr. Jerry Streets, Frederick Streets. He is the senior pastor of the Dixwell Congregational Church here in New Haven, Connecticut, the oldest congregational church of African Americans in the United States. And he sits on the faculty of the Yale Divinity School and is a licensed clinical social worker. So he can give us a little bit of that mental behavioral health advice. Thank you again, Dr. Streets, so much
for
sharing your Saturday with us.
No,
I appreciate it.
This is important.
I appreciate it.
It's so hard sometimes, Shelley and our listening audience, to remember that we ought to trust what we know is true. To trust ourselves. And don't forget that we've come through other moments in life that have been very challenging, and even moments when we thought we weren't going to get through, but here we are.
Right.
So I know for all of us, the pandemic is a new experience. It's not the only first time in the world has faced such crisis, but we'll get through this, and we'll learn, hopefully, and we'll grow. But the only way, and we'll become hopefully a better people, a better world. But in order to get there, we do have to, as I said earlier, take responsibility for being a partner with God as we understand God in those three dimensions of our life, and to recognize that faith. I was raised, you were too probably, Shelley, with the Paul statement, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen.
Yes.
But part of the way to think about that very powerful statement is the substance of things hoped for is the capacity for us through prayer and meditation to imagine what will be the better way. And in that imagining, actually, we can biologically actually experience some of the emotions of having that which is yet to appear. But through the imagination, you kind of feel, the big word now in the larger meditation world is manifestation.
Yes.
How do you manifest something that isn't? Well, you manifest it by being able to imagine it. The faith is a substance of things imagined, hoped for, even though there's no evidence of their actual presence at the moment, but you prepare for it, you see. And you have to keep yourself open in order to do that. The way in which religion or spirituality tends to contribute to our distress or even our emotional unwellness is the way in which it puts us in that binary position of life, that we're given models that says either you're this way or that way, and if you're not, you're lost. Well, there's a lot of gray between us, and most of us are in the gray areas.
And I think when you start to describe that, as we said before, when you're in that gray area, then you are questioning your faith or your religion, or I'm not doing the right thing. Why am I not getting the messages, if you will, that I should be getting, or am I doing the right thing? And as you said, people are not necessarily taught. I know my generation was not taught that if you're in that gray area, you may be on the road to spirituality, what
Hmm.
you're looking for,
The
and people don't understand that they're not necessarily lost as much as it is you're trying to find whatever
right,
it is.
right. And to recognize that that's a part of the journey, so to speak,
Right.
or not so to speak, it is, and to find spiritual religious mentors that will be supportive and a guide rather than a judge, you see.
We'll
And we,
talk about that a little bit more,
mhm,
Reverend Streets, because I think, again, religion is and spirituality are things that are very personal to people. And so it's probably difficult to approach someone and talk about the questions they may have regarding faith. So how does somebody find a person? Because in this internet world, you can go online and find just about anything you want, right? And
yes.
so you can go and you can read, and or you can watch services or whatever it is that you think is going to help you find your faith. But then once you come to the stage of trying to talk to someone, how would that work?
Well, just like the challenge it might be for some people who are having some particular acute moment of distress emotionally, and they hesitate or they worry about being stigmatized if they reach out for counseling or for mental
Hmm.
health care.
Hmm.
They don't want to be labeled as crazy,
Right.
that kind of thing.
Right.
You Part of self care is saying, I there's something I need to take care of myself to make things better. And if I don't take initiative to find it, then I'm not being as mindful of my own needs. I'm putting it off. It's like I feel this pain in my knee every day, and I'm just going to keep putting it off, putting it off, putting it off until
Right.
the day comes when you can't. So instead of avoiding getting help, you have to reach out and ask people, do you know of someone who that I can explore, who can be a kind of spiritual mentor guide for
Hmm.
me?
Hmm.
And just like in any other area of life, if you get two or three names, you talk to those folks, and you trust your intuition, you trust your gut. And if they don't seem to be able to be responsive to what you're looking for, you keep looking. There are a lot of people out there who are spiritual counselors who may not be ordained clergy. They could be
Hmm.
social workers like myself or psychologists who focus on spiritual dimensions. Um, Most people um, would be, and I shouldn't say most, some people would be cautious. You would think normally the person to go to is a local pastor or minister or imam,
Right.
right?
Right.
But if you go to their churches, their synagogue, or their mosque, and you hear them preach, and they come across in that way that makes you more and more uncomfortable, you're going to hesitate to go and say, I want to talk to you to be my
Right.
spiritual guide, because your assumption is they want to guide you to where you
What
don't feel you want to
whatever we
go.
yeah, exactly.
But sometimes seeking that kind of advice or guidance actually helps that pastoral person, if they're willing to be a little bit more open and vulnerable. They will discover that what you're struggling with, if they admit it, they're struggling with it too,
Yeah.
and that might open up a possibility for both of you. But generally speaking, you have to ask around, you have to shop around, you have to be diligent and keep searching till you find that kind of guide. The other part is looking for opportunities in Bible study groups or
Mm.
other kinds of social gatherings, probably online now, where people have these discussions about the. I know it sounds funny, the meaning of life, how do you live your best life, that kind of thing. But don't be careful not to get caught up in the pop culture of this. There's the industry of self-help now has turned into
Yeah.
and
Yes.
all these different methods and books and people. uh, so you have to really be careful, but do the homework,
Yeah.
and be patient. Be patient with yourself. in that process and in that search.
And for those who are weary in all of this,
Yes,
because we have folks around us who are sick, who are dying, who there are folks who have contracted COVID, they're asymptomatic. um, how do or how can they bolster their faith with
sure.
all of these things going around? You give empathy, you're giving of yourself, you're holding on to your faith, but you're weary.
Yeah.
How can you boost yourself?
Well, the short answer is the weariness is normal. How could it not be under the circumstance?
Mm-hmm.
But the antidote, if you will, to weariness is rest. That means giving yourself the opportunity to rest. And rest includes pausing. It can include sometimes letting go of
Mm.
that which you're still trying to control that you really don't have any control
Control
over.
over. Yeah.
Recognizing I need to rest, and rest can take a lot of different forms. But my rest means that I have to do something about my body, something about my mind, something about my spirit, and that to have that self-care is not selfishness. So many people think that if they really stop and take care of themselves, that they're being selfish. And there are people
Mm.
around them that will say, "Oh, you're being selfish. I need this, I need that. How
Right.
can you take 2 days off? Or how can you, I called you all day and you didn't answer at all." And you say, "Well, I took a mental health day." Well, how can you take a mental health day knowing what
Right.
I'm being a little facetious, but
But
that's how it comes across.
right.
And so you have to um, uh, and understand the importance of taking care of yourself. You see, compassion fatigue is the way in which we give out of ourselves compassionately so much that we get exhausted, right? That's compassion fatigue. The corollary to that is the taking in of other
Mm.
people's stories and suffering. You take it in so much until you get filled up. So in one way, you get filled up, and that leads to emotional and physical struggle. The other way, you're giving out all the time, and that leads to exhaustion. And so it means finding and taking deliberate, intentional action for us to rest and to know that rest is a form of prayer.
Mm.
It can also be a form of meditation because there's no one way to address the divine in each of us, understanding of God. There are multiple ways. Even when the disciples asked Jesus to teach him how to pray, he said, well, first of all, you don't have to do this in a big public way, showing off,
Right.
all your
Right.
words and all that kind of stuff. Go somewhere quietly. And then when you get to that quiet resting place, you say, Abba, Father. And Abba is a very interesting word because it's a word of endearment and relationship. It's not daddy, though people say,
Right.
it's
Right.
not it's not father in the misogynist sense. It's recognizing that you're addressing your understanding of God that's so central to your own struggle and your own life. And so it has a level of intimacy. And that level of intimacy is not a public engagement,
Mm.
if
Mm.
you will. So that's if you're feeling weary, know that it's normal. And when you pause to take care of yourself, you shouldn't feel guilty about doing it. And that's part of having a spiritual and or religious life to build in that kind of rest, if you will. They don't call
Someone
it a
says,
Saturday for any for
right,
nothing.
right. Someone says, I guess participating in what makes you uncomfortable to a degree, this probably goes back a little bit to the conversation we had a few minutes ago,
Hmm.
helps you better define the spiritual life you want.
Absolutely. Uh, some people don't think about this, but we are far more responsible for our own spiritual and religious life than we sometimes think about, because we want to place it on some guru, some pastor. We want to be led by someone. There's a difference between being led by someone and being assisted or helped. So we can derive help and assistance, but the real responsibility for our journey is one that we have to take.
Yeah.
No one else can lead us, but ourselves in that sense. And it's okay. It's okay. If anything, if people could take away from our conversation today, I would want them to take away that it's okay not to have all of the answers.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
You know, let go of trying to control things that you can't control, and recognize that when you're feeling uncomfortable or anxiety, these are ways by which your mind and your body and your spirit are saying to you, pay attention.
Mm.
So don't don't be a, don't be in a rush to get rid of the discomfort or the anxiety. Ask the discomfort and the anxiety, what are you trying to tell me? These could be angels trying to wake you up in a certain way. You see.
Yeah.
So anxiety is your friend. Discomfort is really your friend. And the only person who's not anxious is someone who's no longer on the planet. So so anxiety is either helpful or not. It's a matter of how you interpret it and how you control it.
So, in controlling that anxiety, what what can we look for? What should we be coming out on the other side of things with?
The short answer is peace. That's the short answer. It's maybe in the romantic answer. But 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 peace in the sense of engaging the world and yourself in a non-anxious way. Um, in our community, we may say this is what it means to be cool.
Right.
We all know this is, boy, that's one of the coolest persons I've ever.
I
They,
know,
they
right?
just don't seem to be, they're just,
Flustered, bothered,
no, they,
anything.
you know. Um, it doesn't mean that they don't have struggles, or that doesn't mean that they're denying stuff.
Right.
They just have a swag about them that they move through the world, right?
Yeah.
Some people are
Yeah.
born with that more so capacity that others of us have to nurture it.
Yeah.
And sometimes you see this in older people who've been through some things.
Right.
And so um,
Right.
that's the other side. It's about that kind of peace. It's not about answers. It's not about guarantees that you're going to go to heaven. It's living with the trust that you will, rather than with the
Mm,
anxiety that you won't.
mm. That that is key, Reverend Streets. You just said a word there, because I think so many people are so concerned about the afterlife, where they're
Hmm.
going to end up, what's going to happen, that sometimes they either get caught up in the religious part of it to make it go, or they're just so confused. They're again in that gray area,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
so consequently, I think you have people who are spiritually frustrated
Right.
because they don't know how to find that peace.
Right. Oh, it's an orientation to the religious life that it's that whole dichotomy between law and faith, or law and grace. That is, here's a checklist of do's and don'ts, and
Right.
as long as you do the do's and don't do the don'ts, you're gonna be fine. So it's a more legalistic, ritualistic way.
Hmm.
And what the New Testament teaches us, at least my interpretation of part of what Jesus came and was challenging people, he talked more about the spirit, not just the law. You can obey the laws, but not have the right spirit. You
Right.
see, you can in fact legally do the right thing, but be internally morally corrupt in other ways. So it's that larger spiritual life that faith and religion and spirituality it attempts to nurture and get at, and not just the legalistic structural ways. And again, I'm not putting that approach down, but it's not
Right.
either. It's not either or. It's both and.
Okay.
You know.
Someone asks, how can we assist our children through this spiritual journey? What should
Ah,
we be concentrating on with them? Great
right.
question. Great question.
My answer is not going to please some people. The greatest, I think one of the greatest ways you can help a child's spiritual development is to help the child be a child, to provide safety, reassurance, and love. Because I believe, like some of my colleagues, even in the psychology field, who approach this from an empirical studies standpoint, that we are innately born religious and spirit. We're innately born spiritual. We get socialized out of our spirituality,
Wow.
and so you have to rediscover it again.
Okay.
Children are naturally spiritual, and when we love them, protect them, and allow them to be children, to explore. I had a friend of mine who took his little girl, 3 years old, to the beach one day, and she he looked over at her at one point, and she was just mesmerized watching the waves coming in and out. But she was so still and so quiet that he really, he kind of, just when he was getting ready to push her, she looked up at him and said, "Daddy, who's doing that?" That's a spiritual question. Who's making the waves move back? I mean, it's a science question. It's a
Right.
spiritual question.
Right. Right.
And it was a moment for some really nice. He said really nice time with his daughter, trying to at that 3-year-old level to talk about what she was feeling. So yeah, I mean Sunday school or religious school, day school if you're Jewish, or day school with the Muslim community. I mean, many religions have their Christian education, their religious education component. And as a parent, you need to hopefully find that faith community you want to be a part of, but also examine that curriculum and what they're really teaching too. You need to know that. But in addition to those structural ways, again, the best way to help a child to grow spiritually is to help a child feel safe to be a child.
Yeah, especially during the pandemic.
Especially during the pandemic.
I remember very distinctly, I was so-called shopping churches. And at that time, my daughter might have been about 10, 11.
Mm-hmm.
And the pastor stood in the pulpit and said, there will be no gays married in my church, in this church. And my daughter looked at me and said, "Mommy, that's not what Jesus says. Why would he say that? Isn't that against what Jesus says?" And I could not get her to go back to that church.
And
I
where did
couldn't
she
get her
get that? Where did she get that perspective?
by me explaining to her that we were all human and humans come in different forms, but we all have a spirit. And there's also, in all humans, there are faults, there's goodness, there's, light, there's evil. That's part of the human experience. So even though people may try to treat you differently because of the way you look,
Right.
you try to make it your best to treat people as humans. Now, it's not to say that, there's going to be a time when you're going to have to stand up for yourself,
Right.
As a person of color
Right.
in certain environments.
Well,
But
your comment underscores for me what a lot of parents don't necessarily think about is that those kinds of moments and teachings that, like you just described with your daughter, is spiritual education. That's part of the spirituality. And what your daughter's response hit right on the head of the the second part of the two essential teachings of the world's religions, and particularly Christianity. Love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as
Mm-hmm.
yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That the second part of that commandment is exactly what how she responded to her discomfort of what she was hearing. You see,
Yeah, and it was, yeah, I mean, and it was a blue day in my house because she, she was quiet all the way home. She went upstairs to her room. She didn't come down till dinner. I
mm-hmm,
mean, it really touched something within her.
mm-hmm,
And we had conversations after that. But I also couldn't get her to go back to that church. And
right,
when you're a parent who's raising a child on your own, it's difficult to walk back into a church and then explain to that child, well, I like all the other things that
right,
are going on here.
right.
And
Well, that kind of compartmentalization is hard for a
right,
child.
right,
We
right,
like the youth program, but we don't like
right.
the way. Um, uh, but you know, I'm interpreting, projecting perhaps. Your daughter was sensing that feeling that maybe this was this particular pastor's orientation as an umbrella to everything about the mission of the church. And if he was going to be that condemning and exclusive, then it's hard to receive anything else from him that even might be something she likes. You see,
Yeah. And I think that's what it was.
right,
She was in the space of, well, I can't, because that's always going to be with me, right?
right,
That statement's always going to be with me. I can't necessarily believe that he has other things that are positive
right,
when this is something that's underlying and the congregation agrees with him.
right. Yeah, as we all grow older, we become more discerning, have more
Right.
critical thinking capacities. Uh, but again, every one way or the other, whether we do it consciously or not, all of us have our limit. The good enough of a situation, and once that situation doesn't become good enough, once it goes over our limit, we
Hmm.
we say, I'm out of here.
Yeah. And
you
that's
know,
exactly what she did. She's like,
yeah.
I'm out of here.
And so we all need to know what that limit is. You know.
So Reverend Streets, and this is the last question. How do we look for the other side of this? Do we stay empathetic? How do we, and I asked the question already, but I still want to say, how do we hold on?
We hold on because we have faith in life as a whole. We hold on for our children. Uh, we hold on because the alternative is not an option. Um, I mean this in a general way.
Yeah.
Holding on is an act of faith. Someone said that every birth of a child is an indication that God hasn't given up on humanity.
Mm,
Uh, so holding on is more than just a psychological, physical thing about continuity or survival. It's about having faith in the flourishing capacity of human beingness that I believe God has put in all of us, and so it's a statement of faith and or our spirituality that we hold on, but we're not holding on just for ourselves. We're
mm.
holding on for the people coming behind us, children, but we're also holding on for the future that awaits our holding on for it to come into being. you know, uh,
Thank you, Reverend Streets. I appreciate you being here so much. You
oh,
always have a good word. You always get me to think. And it's been a minute since I've had you on, so it was
well,
time.
I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for you and what you do.
Thank
and
you.
for your audience. And I would say to all the folks who are listening to us now that that life in all of its challenges, there's such is such a gift to all of us, and we
Indeed.
life is a gift to us. We are a gift to each other, and we are a gift back to life. And don't lose that perspective of your giftedness. That's what it partly means to be a spiritual person.
Remember your giftedness. Reverend Jerry Street, Senior Pastor, Dixwell Congregational Church here in New Haven, Connecticut, the oldest congregational church of African Americans in the United States. He sits on the faculty of the Yale Divinity School and is a licensed clinical social worker. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Streets, for coming on The Collective. Next week, folks, total turnaround. We're talking about sports.
Ah, what a
Total
night.
turnaround.
It's a great
Yeah.
time to talk about it.
Oh, yeah. We got a lot to discuss. Ant-Man will be back with me next week. But you've been with The Collective here on WSME Enlightenment Radio. Positivity is everything. See you next week.